Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for attending our first installment of the Sustainability Speaker Series. My name is Violet Penman, and I'm here representing two of the sponsors for tonight's event, the University of Wisconsin-River Falls Office of Sustainability and Hope for Creation. Tonight's presentation will feature Peter Kilde, who is speaking on food poverty and health. Before I hand things over to Peter, I would like to acknowledge the sponsors who worked to make this event and series possible. So our host for the Sustainability Speakers Series is the River Falls Public Library, which enriches lives and builds community by connecting people with information, ideas, spaces, and opportunities. We are very thankful to have the library as part of our community and appreciate their ongoing efforts to host events to educate our community. The next event sponsor is Powerful Choices, which is a community-wide effort to instill a strong local conservation ethic while demonstrating the importance and effectiveness of conservation, energy efficiency, and renewable energy. Powerful Choices, which is a department of the River Falls Municipal Utilities, recognizes that utilities play a large role in finding solutions to reduce humans' impact on climate change. Co-sponsoring talks and community events like this is an example of how we're listening and turning it into action. Our next sponsor is the University of Wisconsin-River Falls Office of Sustainability. We endeavor to engage students, faculty, staff, and the wider community through hands-on educational and volunteer opportunities to further expand our shared integrity as socially, economically, and environmentally responsible citizens. We do this through hosting campus events, partnering with community events, and working collaboratively across campus and beyond to improve sustainability in all its facets. Our final sponsor is the River Falls Community Group Hope for Creation. Hope for Creation is a group of area churches with representation from the City of River Falls and the University of Wisconsin-River Falls, partnering together to create a hopeful, sustainable future through collaboration, education, advocacy, and action. Hope for Creation acknowledges the urgency of environmental challenges and seeks ways to protect the earth, which is our common home. Thank you again to all of our sponsors for your hard work in our community and the region. If anyone in the audience would like to get in touch with any of these organizations, please feel free to email us at sustainability@uwrf.edu, and we can send you contact information. Many of these groups also have websites and Facebook pages that you can visit. As I mentioned, tonight's presentation is focused on food, poverty, and health with Peter Kilde. Peter Kilde has been an executive director of the West Central Wisconsin Community Action Agency, Inc., or WestCAP, since 1995. WestCAP has developed and manages multiple low-income housing projects and operates homelessness intervention programs, weatherization, food security, adult literacy and skills, and various sustainability community initiatives. He serves on the National Community Action Partnership Board of Directors, where he co-chairs the Strategic Visions Committee, which focuses on how poverty can most effectively be addressed in the 21st century America. Recipient of the 2013 Charles M. Hill Senior Award for Housing Excellence, Mr. Kilde is widely recognized for his leadership in affordable housing innovation and energy conservation. Peter also serves on the Wisconsin Community Action Program Association, or WSCAP Board, and Regional Workforce Development Board, and the Board of Slipstream, a Wisconsin-based national nonprofit linking energy conservation and social equity. He is an almost founder of the former chair of the St. Croix Valley Foundation Board. Prior to coming to WestCAP, Mr. Kilde worked for the Amherst H. Wilder Foundation of St. Paul, Minnesota, where for 10 years he was operations director of the Wilder Forest, a 1,200-acre conference and education center linking social and environmental concerns. Peter Kilde now lives with his daughters on a small farm they operate near Spring Valley, Wisconsin. Thank you, Peter, for presenting today. And without further ado, I hand it over to you.
Well, thank you much. That introduction is a lot to live up to, but I'll do my best. So the first, comforting thing here when I stand up is to see that half of my first photo just vanished. So we'll, it's got to go uphill from there, and that's encouraging. The first thing I would say is that I'm not entirely sure, Mike, how we ended up with this title. My recollection is we talked about a few things that we might talk about, and it ends up being sustainability, food, poverty, and health, which is a little bit like life, the universe, and everything. So if you don't mind, I'm going to mess with it a little bit. I was thinking that, and this, by the way, is a clue that, these slides are going to be packed with information, so yeah, you got to keep that in mind. Poverty is a math problem. And this is actually a title of a variation of this thing I've given to some politicians who tend to think that poverty is an issue of character and laziness and, all this kind of stuff. And I point out that, actually it's pretty much a math problem. But I think the most useful way to approach this, and where I landed here, is on the economics of perpetual poverty, because that really kind of wraps all these things together. I would also point out that over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to break every rule of PowerPoint presentation that I'm aware of. Thank you. I have too many slides. I'm going to go through them too quickly. They're going to have too much stuff on it. But the reality is, at least that I'm trying to convey tonight, is that the economics of perpetual poverty could be a PhD dissertation. There's absolutely no way to get into it. And if you just look at some little pieces of it, you miss a lot. And so this is kind of a 30,000-foot view. I say I'm going to be moving pretty quickly. I would appreciate it if, unless you have a burning question, we kind of hold on to those till the end, because I might just get to it. And I'll try to leave, like about 15 minutes at the end for discussion, that kind of stuff, if that works. If you do happen to see something where you got an answer right away, that's fine too. Okay. So, first of all, this economic disparity has been around a while. So when we talk about perpetual poverty, I should mention that this first presentation I gave with this title came out of a presentation I was actually giving in Stillwater on affordable housing, right? Well, at that time, the poverty rate, the official poverty rate in the valley was about 5%. And the first question is, well, why would we need it? So I felt the need to kind of trace the gap between the public perception of poverty and what's really going on. But I needed to get into the affordable housing piece. So I said, invite me back sometime to talk about, and this phrase just popped out of my mouth, the economics of perpetual poverty, and we can dig into this deeper. And then at the end of the presentation, a guy came up and took me up on the offer. So then I had to actually do the thing. Anyway, I'm from here. The 7 counties in that sort of green-gray are the 7 counties that WestCAP primarily serves. We also do a couple of things in Burnett and Washburn County and a few other areas, but our primary service territory and an area where our board comes from is the 7 counties that are identified there. For your global thinkers, from here, relocalizers, let's talk about that farm a little bit. So I live on this little farm, and it's located just about a stone's throw away from the northeast corner of Pierce County. So I'm just into Dunn County, just right on the county line. And it's about 80 acres. We do a fair amount of things around sustainability out there. I say that the primary crop that we're growing is sequestering carbon through 60 acres of woods and managed grasslands and that kind of stuff. The mission of WestCAP, the organization I've been serving for 26 years as executive director, is to take action against poverty by developing the social and economic assets of low-income families in their communities. The part in red is what brings me here tonight. So we're not just serving those families, but we're also charged by some of our primary funding to be working on the causes of poverty and working to create a more just and sustainable society. So this mission is unique to our agency, but it's the kind of thing that these 1,000 CAP agencies run around the country. As well mentioned that I also serve on the national board of the National Community Action Partnership. That's a organization for 1,000 agencies like WestCAP around the country. We cover 99% of the counties. And on that board, I've been working on these sustainability issues, and going back to my background at Wilder Forest, the link between environmental issues and poverty, which are really very pronounced and becoming ever more pronounced. This report I did 10 years ago, brought some experts together from around the country, and you notice the subtitle, Preparing Poor America for Harder Times Ahead. And I think that really is kind of a big part of the topic we'll be dealing with tonight. This particular report and the experts that we brought together looked at three kind of mega trends and their impact on poverty. One is environmental degradation, particularly around climate change, but also resource depletion, whether it's fossil fuels, food production, fresh water, that kind of thing. And then the economic turmoil that all that is creating. And I will have to say, 10 years after doing this report, my credibility has gone up on the national scene because in all these things, we're seeing all these effects we were talking about a long time ago. So that's a very dark silver lining. First thing I'd like to do tonight is to offer a baseline definition of economics. This is my definition, but it draws heavily on some graduate work I did at the University of Minnesota in economics. And I just sort of like this idea. It's not just a particular form of capitalism or free trade or laissez-faire, all those kind of things. It actually is all of the arrangements, okay, that people make to distributed limited goods and services throughout a population with unlimited needs and desires. That last phrase was my professor's, and I really like it. And if you have any doubt about that, consider the billionaires racing to do recreational space travel. I mean, there's just no limit to what people will consume from any other factor, anything we can make up. So the fact that, in a sense, there's always tension, always more people wanting than there is stuff to actually have, okay? So the question is, well, how's that working out, right? And from a economic equity perspective, you'd have to say not so hot, okay? In our current system, and this is actually back a few years ago, the top 1% of the households own more wealth than the bottom 99% combined. That's only gotten worse since then, okay? And the way this breaks this down, I think it's kind of interesting into slices of the pie. An important theme that I'll be working to develop throughout the presentation here is that you get down here to the bottom 40% of the population, they basically owe nothing or have negative assets, okay? More debt than they have assets of any kind. I would have to say, because we're in the economic equity business, that this is not a very good outcome, right? This is not the society that I would want to be creating. There are a couple other ways to look at this that are interesting. One has to do, the first one was on wealth. This is on income, okay, on an annual basis. A couple things I'd point out. Again, the lowest 20% here, absolutely flat as a pancake. I mean, just no progress going back to 1965, okay, when they started this chart. But the more money you have, it gets just a little better. Then you have a little more money, you're gonna. And of course, if you're super wealthy, these numbers, just continue to go off the charts. So that's the way the system that we have created to distribute these limited goods and services amongst this population is working out in America right now. I just threw this in there because I thought it's interesting. I dug this up when I was working on the slightly previous version of this presentation that I gave at a conference in Boston at the end of August. And the fact that the racial groupings, regardless, and this goes back to 1965 again, stay remarkably consistent. No matter what else is changing, the Black population is on the lowest end of this, and Hispanics is just a little better, and whites are up there. Not quite sure what's going on with the Asians, but I thought that was a very interesting outcome. That we talk about and think about all the progress we're making in race relations and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of evidence that suggests not too much. Which gets me to poverty. So I'd also like to suggest this definition of poverty. This is my own. That poverty is living in a household that does not have enough money to afford a survival budget without public assistance. My question to all of you is, does that work for you? Anybody think that's missing the boat? Okay. And what I'm talking about here in terms of the survival budget is what you'd expect: food, shelter, clothing, healthcare, childcare, education and transportation, and a report that I'll be drawing very heavily on, the United Way Alice reports, have added connectivity, which is, if you imagine trying to function economically in this society without, cell phone, internet, computers, that kind of stuff. I mean, you're isolated. You have to have it if you're going to be a participant. Okay, so I think it's legit. So again, in terms of how we're doing, the Urban Institute in 2017, a big study funded by Gates, concluded that about 131 million Americans, or there's that number again, 40% of the population, are in this group. Okay? That's an important number. The other thing that's been going on for the last 10 years or so is that starting in the state of New Jersey, the United Way in New Jersey got a bunch of money and wanted to really drill down on the economic reality of that state, okay? And so they went, into every county. They found, what does it cost to meet all these basic needs and all that kind of stuff. They came up with this survival budget. And then over the years, developed through kind of a subset of the National United Way organization called United for Alice, right? Let me back up a little bit. Alice, is anybody familiar with the Alice report? Yes, a few people are. That's great. So ALICE is an acronym, and it stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, and Employed. That's what ALICE means. Okay, and we'll come back on this many times. You don't have to get all this nailed. But so they started doing this same project because it was so useful in various states. At this point, they've done 23 states around the country with this drill down, often at a township level in the state, on exactly what it costs to live and what people are paying, what the jobs are paying, what the gaps are. And then they also issue a nationwide report. The nationwide report for 2020 is called On Uneven Ground, and they put that number at 42%, almost exactly the same place that the Urban Institute landed nationwide. But wait, you might say, the official poverty measure in the United States is only 10.5%, right? So this is important for a lot of reasons. One of the main reasons is that for what appears to be a majority of the public, and I understand this absolutely completely, if you want to know what the poverty rate is, what's poverty going on in the country, you look at the poverty rate. And the poverty rate is, okay, 10.5%. That means, 90% of the population is not in poverty, right? And so, it doesn't seem all that bad. This number is complete hooey. I think that's the technical term for it. Okay? And I'm going to take you on a little time travel here. The first part of Lies, Damn Lies, and Statistics, which is a quote from Mark Twain, if you don't recognize it, and introduce you to Molly Oransky. You all know Molly, right? Of course not. Nobody knows Molly Oransky. Molly Oransky was a highly regarded economist in the Social Security Administration in the 50s and 60s. She got charged with the task, when they were starting to do commodity food programs, of defining poverty. So Molly went to a major study that USDA had done in the mid-50s on what average families spent and that kind of thing, and determined that, a conscientious homemaker in a low-income family would spend about a third of that family's income on groceries. Okay, so she had her staff go out and literally shop, pushing, shopping carts around in various stores, just very clearly lined out. This is what a family of one person would need. This is two. This is three. This is four. This is five. Very elaborate system, and then multiply that times 3, and that's how they determined poverty rate in 1959. Okay. All that's well and good except for a couple things. The mid-50s were a while back, right? Just to give you an idea how incredibly long ago that was, this is what I look like, okay, in 1955. And this was my favorite car in 1959, the Cadillac Coupe de Ville, still is actually. But, so what's important about this particular thing is that in 1921, the average American family was only spending 8.6% of its budget on groceries, but we still use exactly the same formula. Okay? There have been dozens of efforts to revise this, make it more accurate. They've all failed, and I'm going to get into that a little bit. But having led you through all this, I'm going to also submit at this point that that's not the problem. This is the problem. Molly probably wasn't that far off. And what they do with the poverty rate every single year is they adjust the level that you're in to be in poverty or not, right? And they adjust it by the consumer price index. And the consumer price index, particularly for the stuff that these folks spend their money on, is wildly off. We're going to get into that a little bit. So every year, because of this, about 1 million people in America right now who last year were in poverty, officially, this year are not. And their economic value or condition, the ability of their money to buy the stuff they need and stuff, hasn't changed at all. You multiply that times 60 years, which is how long this has been in place, and you get to the disparity that I started with, where the official poverty rate is 10%, but actually, when you look at the numbers, about 40% of the population can't afford to live here. Period. Can't even afford to survive. Okay. That's why we get into this bizarre thing that you may have some familiarity with if you're at all connected with social services, where people use these weird multiples of the poverty table to assume eligibility. It's an attempt to at least correct it a little bit, but it's all over the place. CHIP is the Child Health Insurance Program. 200 to 300% of poverty is what you have to be in there. Low-income weatherization, 200%. Heating assistance, 150. Medicaid, 138. I don't know where they pull that number from. Food stamps, 130. Community services block. So everything's using a multiple because everybody knows that the figure's wrong, but all the multiples are also wrong. And if you, unfortunately, need Head Start services, they use 100% of poverty. And 100% of it, there aren't that many people around with 100% of poverty because you can't survive on it. And it's making it a real challenge for Head Start programs to meet their targets for enrollment. HUD uses a better system. They use percent of county median income. So it always moves with the actual dollars, that kind of stuff. But can't get too far into the weeds on that one. So back to Alice. So in the Alice report, they really do this deep dive. I have found this to be so incredibly useful because in every county, and we go out to every county board and that kind of stuff and present a little bit of what's going on, I can tell a supervisor, well, what township? You're from Troy Township? Well, in Troy Township, the poverty rate is blah, or this is what it costs to live, this kind of stuff. It drills down to that incredible detail. Plus, they are committed to updating this every year. The report that the Urban Institute did was great, but they did it in 2017, and every year it gets a little more inaccurate. I had the great privilege, actually, created the privilege in some sense, but of co-presenting on this topic with the lead researcher for the United for Alice project nationwide in Boston, and it was extremely interesting, and I love the work they're doing. And also, when I was at a conference where they trotted out this report, and the state director of United Way was there, and I kept bugging her with questions, and at the end, she kind of scowled at me and said, "You want to serve on the advisory committee for the research of this project next time?" I said, "Yes." And so if you open the quote in the cover of this one, I'm in there as a research advisor. But it's actually very helpful because, in a sense, I'm a customer of this information. So I know what we need to sell the programs, to sell the points, and all that. So who is Alice? Again, the Alice population is, over here, nationwide, about 29% of the country. They tend to be all the low-wage workers, healthcare workers, security guards, laborers, offers, administration. Because they are at, up to 3 times the federal poverty level, they're hardly eligible for any services, right? Plus, one of the things that kind of blew me away that I learned from this national researcher is that for this population, they spend 22% of their money on taxes. So if you happen to be a politician and you're talking to people that are struggling, working hard, can't pay integrated, you get up and say, the reason you're having a problem is you're being taxed to pay those, lazy people over there who don't even want to work, It inspires a false sense of who's on your side and who isn't, okay? And I think it frankly has a lot to do with what's going on in the country at the moment. So in Wisconsin, 2018, and the reason I'm using 2018 numbers is the Alice data, it's a couple years after the data that they do the report. So this was 2020. They haven't come out with the 2021 report yet. It's due probably in November, but they haven't come out with it because of COVID. And they're kind of rethinking their whole approach, particularly because of the fact that we now realize that all these people that we don't pay enough to survive on, we absolutely need to survive ourselves. And, there's a lot of things going on here. But at this time, 2018, 34% of the people in Wisconsin could afford to survive a budget, okay? The other thing that's important about that particular year is I would claim that in that year, the economy was doing about the best it theoretically can, right? Stock market is off the charts. The employers are looking for, employees. The economy's booming. And in that system, 42% of the people that live in the country can't afford a survival budget. Something is wrong with this picture. Something really serious. Okay. Pierce County. I chose Pierce County. I know we're in St. Croix County at the moment, but most of the community behind me here is in Pierce County. So I dug up some current Pierce County data. 2018, pre-COVID, there were 15,367 households in Pierce County that were in this group, 32%. So it's a slightly wealthier county than the state average by a little bit. Because I ended up with a title for this presentation of Food, Poverty, and Health, I had to throw in a slide about food and poverty and health, because otherwise I could be hauled in for false advertising. So I did dig this out of the report, and it actually tells a lot. So you can probably read it, but basically, one of the things that they've found nationwide is that when you control for things like age and genetics, about the highest correlation with health and well-being is your income. Okay. And there's a whole field on the social determinants of health that this draws from. But, you look at these things. Twice as likely to have depression, 91% more likely to have asthma, 66% more likely to have a heart attack, 57% more likely to have congestive heart failure. The defining quality is food insecurity. Food insecurity is always part of a economic household that cannot afford a survival budget, right? Because you're cutting things all the time. All right, so again, Pierce County, if you're a single person, the federal poverty level we talked about before, right now is $12,140 a year, okay? According to Alice, a single person needs $24,600 to survive, okay? Family of four, the difference is even more dramatic. Federal poverty level at 25, and this is current data, and the Alice conclusion for Pierce County is a big 71,000 just to survive. So, other than showing off my lack of proficiency in technology, I literally took a picture of the computer screen and pasted it onto the figure. I couldn't figure out how else to do it. But one of the things that the Alice reports do, which is so helpful, is they do these household budgets for each county, right? And what are the housing costs, childcare costs, and all that kind of stuff. And if you think it's lavish, single person at $158 a month for food, right? So this is not, going out to eat all the time. Let's put it that way. Transportation is a real cost. They include taxes, right? Which is never in any other calculation. But this population, as I say, pays a lot of taxes. And what it works out to, and unfortunately, this particular version of the thing cut off the very bottom, the punchline on this particular slide. But I unfortunately have it here, which is that in Pierce County, if you're a single person to a survival budget, you would need to be making, just cut it off on mine too. Well, it's about $13.40 an hour, okay? And if you're, the amount of income you would need if you were in this particular model of a four-person household would be the equivalent of $35.81 an hour job. Now, again, you may have two people working or someone working part-time. There's lots of variations, but would have to add up to that, basically, to survive in this county. About 60% of the jobs in Wisconsin pay under $20 an hour. A lot of them pay under $15 an hour. So this goes back to the math problem. It just doesn't work, right? So a few other things just to talk about, the picture in our part of the world. If you look at the 7 counties, again, up here that are WestCAP service territory, in the month of September, okay, 1 month, 11,808 people went to food pantries, okay? And that number is actually down a little bit because more food has been available during the pandemic because of the generosity of people, which is wonderful. Usually it's over 13,000. We have 146 people on homeless waiting lists and 162 people in shelters, okay? And just our little rural part of Wisconsin. In Pierce County, 1,440 people visited food pantries. We have 15 on the homeless waiting list. We weren't able to break out the shelter numbers. We just didn't have them for this county. But we do run the Section 8 program here. Section 8 is a program where if you qualify, the rent that you have to pay for your housing is 1/3 of your income. Doesn't matter what your income is, just pay 1/3, and then the government picks up the rest. Okay, so we had 14 folks in Pierce County that were enrolled in the Section 8 program, and 57 people on the waiting list. Okay, and that I've seen it over 100. We just stopped the waiting list. So there's a lot of poverty around this part of the country. Wasn't able to pull us out of the current report, out of the last report, the 2018 report, again talking about this population. 85% of these families were working families. Okay, these are the Alice group, and only 9% were receiving rental assistance or lived in any kind of subsidized housing. You know, one of the myths out there is, well, if you're poor, you can get into Section 8. Well, no, you can't. You know, it doesn't come anywhere near the amount. I think it's the figure is set by Congress and divided out across the country, and that's all you get. It's way less than the need, obviously. And if you want to really do a dig deep on what the market does for the other 91%, I would highly recommend this book. We're in a library after all. It's right up there. Okay. This is probably one of the two most important slides that I'll show tonight. Okay. And that is that for the 34%, which is two groups, it's the Alice group who are above the poverty line and the poverty. Okay, that's both of those together. That population between 2007 and 2018, if you add up the consumer price, inflation, the thing that determines poverty level and determines eligibility for Social Security, for on and on and on. Okay, that went up 21.6%, but the actual costs of what these people spend their money on, what low-income, moderate-income families spend their money on in that period, went up 44.4%. Right? This is a huge difference, right? And again, I actually put a proposal out to Congress on changing this and realized why that's hard. If you are just using that inflation rate, right? The consumer price index, which is exactly what they use to adjust that level every year. Again, under the current environment, about 1 million folks in America who were in that poverty classification last year are defined out of poverty with no change in their status. Okay? They're just defined out. That problem is exacerbated by the fact that if you look at all those other programs that are using multiples of that same effect goes all the way through. The multiples all change, and they all change by the same inaccurate adjustment. Okay. So, remember this guy? I want to talk a little bit about the environment that helped create the economics of perpetual poverty, which predate this guy by decades. Don't worry about it. So, in May of 2019, President Trump announced his administration would like to change the way the federal poverty level is adjusted annually by using something called the change CPI. The assumption here is that adjustment is too big, that 1.9% or whatever it is. We want it less than that, right? Okay. So the way change CPI works is that it's an assumption that as the prices of goods go up, individuals substitute less expensive items, thereby reducing their overall expenses. Okay. Now, if you're affluent and running into a little bit of a pinch and say, well, honey, we can't afford ribeye, again this week, let's T-bones would probably be okay for our barbecue this week. Okay, so that's one. If you're in a population that already can't meet its basic needs to survive, they're doing these substitutions all the time. All right, so that's problem number one with this particular approach. Before we go too far down that, and I'll get back to it. Turns out that President Trump was following the lead of this guy, who you may also remember, who tried to do exactly the same thing. Wasn't quite able to pull it off, just about near the end of administration. Probably because this guy had also tried exactly the same thing and failed, but I'm just going to go out on a limb and assume that he was inspired by this guy's success, okay, in implementing this guy's plan to effectively introduce change CPI into the inflation rate already, calling it substitution. So anybody see a pattern here? Okay. One of the things I say about this is you're not going to be able to elect your way out of this problem. I think that Herbert Walker was probably inspired by this guy, who's the first person that I'm aware of who pretty much said, he was getting beat up all the time because inflation was so high, after the Vietnam War and that kind of stuff, that he developed something called the core inflation. And he took out the two things that were inflating most rapidly, which were energy and food, and then everything was hunky-dory. Okay? The story ain't over. So, we get to lies, damn lies, and statistics part 2. Or as I call it, FPL, CPI, GDP, oh my, or how fudge is made. All right. Okay, so we're talking about substitution, right? And seeing CPI already being baked into the consumer price index, right? They're already assuming that you're making those adjustments and whatnot. And just to remind you of how this used to work, they used to have a fixed set of goods, and then every year they would take that fixed set of goods, they would see the price change, and that would be the inflation rate. Makes a lot of sense, whether it's a gallon of gas, whether it's a pound of hamburger, you name it, you just do it quickly. That's not what they've been doing for a long time. The other thing that Bill Clinton was able to implement, which started under his predecessor, Bush the first, was something called hedonics. And we're going to go through that looking glass momentarily. And then the third thing is weighting. So hedonics is technically defined as for the pleasure of, but basically what the people who were working with the consumer price index came up with was, and this is just the most recent slide I could find of this phenomenon, but in 2003, flat screen TV was $330. Okay. 2004 was still $330. Price didn't change. But this one had brighter picture, could take more channels, and had a remote control. So they said, okay, even though that still costs $330, we're going to say that because it's more of a thing that you're getting for that same amount of money, we're going to say that it costs $195. Okay. 46% of the items that they use to calculate the consumer price index have a calculation like this in $. Okay. The other thing they do is if something seems to be taking a pretty big chunk out of the economy, they said, the economy is different than that. Let's just not give that as much weight. So they weigh the different sectors. This I don't quite understand how they do it. All right. A couple of slides. One, so I just said the federal poverty rate is 10.5% right now. If you had a 14% federal poverty rate, the map would look like this, where this is under 2% and it's up to like 81%. So that's what America would look like. Okay. If, however, you use the more accurate measurement of Alice plus the poverty, it looks like this. Okay. Same reality, it's just how you describe it. Okay, so I was raised in Lewis and Parsonage, and we had the small catechism, which always goes, well, what does this mean? Okay, so if the CPI were accurately measured, real inflation would be 6%, not 1.9%. And again, I'm using 2019 numbers because COVID and the current thing is throwing everything out of whack. It's fairly consistent for a while. The average Social Security check would be 70% larger. So when you look at a program that was designed to ensure that people in their post-work years would adequately be able to take care of themselves, that check has shrunk, by almost half. The federal poverty level would be accurate. Alice households would be eligible for Head Start. We talked about that. and 3 times as many food insecure households would be eligible for food share. If just that calculation, the consumer price index, was simply a measure of what something costs one year and then what it costs the next year. Simple as that. But that ain't all. So I'll talk a little bit about the gross domestic product calculation. I can't get too far in the weeds on this, but I'll run through this and then I'll tell you a little story about why this is kind of going on. And again, this particular version changed this a little bit. We went from one program to another, so fortunately I'm blessed with having a cheat sheet. Let's make sure I've got this right. All right, so by 2013, when Barack Obama was president, 35% of the gross domestic product was imputed, right? So gross domestic product, you think, well, this is money changing hands. This is economic activity, right? Isn't that what GDP is? Okay. Well, thought was. Well, what's an imputed value? Well, one is what homeowners would be paying in rent if they didn't own their home. Now, I had a daughter who was 10 years old when I first learned this. And I went home and told her, and she just busted out laughing. There's nobody to fall for that. Well, not quite. So that value, and it works, it's about 7% of the gross domestic product of the country, is what homeowners would be paying in rent if they didn't own their home. Not a dime changes hands, no economic activity at all. Another pretty big one in that category is what you would have to pay for checking if it wasn't free. Okay, let's put that in. All right, so in Barack Obama's administration, you may recall, he came in right after the Great Recession, economy was in shambles, did all these things to get the economy to recover. The sweet spot for economists out there is generally regarded to be about a 3% inflation. That's kind of a 3% growth, I'm sorry. So, and he was running about 0. This wasn't working out that well. But then he had the Bureau of Labor Statistics redefine gross domestic product by adding things like monetizing the artistic value of a painting. Like I'm looking at a painting in the lobby of my corporate office, it has this value. Going to a movie, reading a book, not the cost of getting the book or making the movie or buying the painting. Just the value, monetizing the experience, and appreciating it. Okay? Right. You really can't make this up. I could have never made that up. And one of my favorites was he included the amount of money that employers will eventually pay in retirement, okay, as current GDP. Those two calculations and a couple other more technical ones, and overnight we had a 3% growth rate. Solved. And in case you're wondering, I didn't get this out of the Daily Socialist Worker. I got this from the BBC Business column. They were laughing at this. They were going to get away with this? Yes. Because, and we'll get on that too. So, what I want to say about this is, you might wonder, well, why do we do this? Why do these presidents and either party on this? Very simple. Two of the things that presidents are most highly rated on are GDP, rate of progressive growth. GDP is defined as the growth in economic activity minus inflation. It's the second part. So if you do these things, GDP looks good. If you do these other adjustments that lower consumer price index, so inflation looks better, it's that calculation that gets you to GDP. Okay? Both parties in every administration going back as far as, you go back actually farther than Nixon, but he was the first to be egregious about it. So anyway, here's the point. Belaboring a little bit, but all of these things are the pieces that put together the system that makes it possible in the richest country in the world for 40% of the people not to be able to afford it. But that's kind of what I'm getting. The golden rule. Anybody know the golden rule? What is it?
Too much others and too much.
No, the golden rule is the people with the gold make the rule. Okay? Good guess though. So I want to get in a couple of things here. It won't be dig too terribly deeply, but there was a period, all right? The period when I did most of my growing up and everything, when, as Kennedy famously said, a rising tide lifts all boats. And that was the economy. And everybody did about the same up until around 1980. Something happened. And let's just keep that date in mind. I'm going to go through a few slides. So after 1980, you start seeing this split. The lowest 20 percentile, basically flat as a pancake from here to here, no progress. Median income, made a little progress. 95th percentile, off the charts. Okay? So one of the things that they'll tell you is, well, that's the rules of economics. That's just the way these things work. If it wasn't like that, we wouldn't have this wealth and prosperity and all that. These two charts that I just came out last summer, and again, this is meeting. All right, I can't see that reference, but anyway, I got this out of the Times. This happened to show that in the United States, from remember 1980, that period that we just drew your attention to. Okay, 1980, the percentage of national income. Not talking wealth here, we're just talking income on an annual basis. About 10.5%, 11%, for the top 1%. And you're looking at 21% for the bottom 50, that's it. And over the next, until 2015, the 1%, like this, and the bottom 50 experience that. Well, that's the way the economy works. Interestingly enough, in Western Europe, it's almost exactly the same kind of economy, right? Highly technical, it's got a mix of manufacturing, all that kind of stuff. In Western Europe, very slight decline in the bottom 50%, very slight. Same period of time, same international corporation, same. Okay. Point I'm trying to get to in all of this is that these things are choices made by the people who make them. Okay. Another interesting thing, also strangely connected to 1980, is it used to be that the people that produced the economic goods, right, the things that created the value, their incomes went up with the production, right? Until about the same time when, look what happens, the workers, flat as a pancake in terms of what they're actually working. And actually, these numbers are worse than this because they use consumer price index. And the people who own the stock, basically, for the rest of the company, this is what they saw in their earnings, okay? I won't dig into this too much, but again, there was a period going up through, about 1980, when there was, a fair amount of return on household capital income, if you farm, if you have rental, this kind of stuff, and everybody had some. And then about this point, all of that starts breaking apart, and in the lower segments of the population went into negative territory, lost all that ability to earn money from the capital assets. Okay. I'll just let you read this. Sent to me by a friend, and you may remember trickle-down economics, right? And that's basically what we've been living in. And for better or worse, we want it. Give the money to the job creators, and everybody will. Yeah. That's been the model. There's a lot of stuff, especially going on after the last stimulus, where so much of this money went to, again, the top 5% of the population. Got about 90% of the benefit from the stimulus thing. and about 5% of that came back to Main Street. The rest of it chased profits in Dubai, China, wherever. It just doesn't really operate that way. Okay. Another little example of how these things work. So you remember the tax cuts that came with the stimulus. By far, the greatest percent were in the lower parts of the population. Am I disappearing? Sorry. Oh, I forgot to look at the line there behind me. Anyway, and then in the 2018 tax cuts, that's the red line. Who benefited? Well, the 95 to 99% of the top wealth by far got the greatest benefit. And these guys didn't do too bad. The 1% is in the 10th of 1%. Again, these are choices. There's no natural law in this. There's no, this is the fundamentals of the way economics work. These are policy choices that people make. Okay? Interestingly enough, based on that, the same tax cut, the wealthiest corporations in America and Amazon, $10 million, $11 billion in profits, didn't pay a dime in federal tax. In fact, they got a $500 million tax credit. Okay? The rest of these, if you look, an awful lot of oil companies, through this whole thing. These are all companies, and again, I didn't put this out of the Daily Socialist Worker either. This came out of Forbes magazine. Okay. And they have a list of 60. I just grabbed the top 10. And anyway, so you kind of get the idea. I just want to throw this in there. This just looks at the benefits that oil companies made. And I'm not going to villainize oil companies. That's a whole other story. But they did really well under the last plan. And we essentially subsidize the oil extraction industry, fossil fuel extraction in this country. Just wanted to mention, because I'm half Norwegian, that in Norway they have a state-owned petroleum company. This is about 2 years ago, had produced 11.4% of the production that America produces, and got 4.6 billion in revenues to support the government and its programs. They have a third of the poverty rate in America and are consistently rated first or second as the happiest country on earth. What am I saying? I'm not saying we have to be Norway. I'm just saying it doesn't have to be the way it is here. Okay, that's the point. The mechanisms of the golden rule: gerrymandering, Citizen United, income tax code, inheritance tax, capital gains tax. This is how it's played. How it's done. We're going to look briefly to the future, and then I'm going to shut up and let you guys ask questions if you want. Some things that might help, and these are all being considered at various levels. Revising the federal poverty level calculation, the proposal that I made, I'll show you in a minute. Mandate paying a living wage and using a calculation like what Alice comes up with and what you need to live. That would be a way. Another way is to take the money out of it, establishing a minimum standard of living. Right? Everybody gets a great school. Everybody gets a house that's energy efficient, safe to live in, comfortable, that kind of stuff. Everybody gets health care. Everybody gets good education. That kind of stuff. You can sort of go at it on that side as well. Universal basic income is another thing that's being kicked out there. We'll come back to it. A new idea that I just was exposed to in the last couple of weeks, which I think is really interesting, is an idea of universal work benefits. So now the benefits you get as an employee are tied to the employer. But this would be more like Social Security, where, okay, if you're in the labor force, you get health care, you get so many days off for maternity leave, all that. And that's the package that goes with you, right? And it doesn't matter where you work. Takes that burden off the businesses, makes it equally available to everybody. I like this idea, I think. I haven't spent much time with it. The proposal I made was defining the federal poverty calculation at either 75% of the country's median income. So if there was a floor for like super poor countries, some are very poor. Or if you lived in a super rich county, a place where the median income was above the national average, you do 75% of that. And that roughly would take care of the 40% right now who are left out, and you'd never have to change it, right? Because whatever that median income is what it is. It goes up, it goes down, doesn't matter. You're always at that same percentage, and that really is how the economy prices things anyway. One element of the future is climate change. This is what it does to poor people. I happen to have taken somewhat of a lead role in the national, I mentioned that, around developing a position for the national partnership, which they adopted, the national organization, about 4 months ago. And this is kind of the core of my argument. Families who have money and other resources can escape initial disaster, and albeit painfully, begin quickly to recover. Poor families are trapped in place when disaster approaches, bear the brunt of the initial devastation, and slowly, if ever, recover with the loss. That is the difference between, being hit by a wildfire in California or a tornado in Louisiana. The clearest, this really kind of came home to me. I actually have a physical connection to the Katrina thing in New Orleans, and all the people with their somewhat affluent fled, right? Jammed up the freeways for a while, got on airplanes, switched places, hotels. People that didn't sat there and got creamed, went into this hellhole in the Super Bowl, this kind of stuff. That's the way it works. So, climate change, yes, it affects everybody, but the impact it has on poor people and poor communities is extreme. All right. This is the second of the two most important slides that I will share with you tonight. It takes a little interpretation, but I think we can get to it pretty quick. So these are different energy sources going back to 1800, right? So the bottom one here is biomass, basically people heated with wood and that sort of stuff and everything. And then they discovered coal, and then oil, and then natural gas was developed along with oil. That got bigger, and hydrogen. So as we go through time, what has happened, and this is extremely important in the climate change thing, is when you bring on a new energy source, you think, oh, my PV panels are going to offset, 2 tons a year of CO2 and everything. No, what happens is humans just use that much more energy. These things just stack on top of each other, right? Unless you get to some kind of legislation that caps extraction at the source. A couple of interesting facts, you're not even going to believe them, but I'll share them with you anyway, because they happen to be true. 2 years ago, at least, the amount of electricity it took worldwide to process Bitcoin transactions was more than all of the electricity generated by all of photovoltaics in the world. Okay. There's no limit to what people will use. And so, if I buy my Prius, all it means is the gas is a little cheaper for the guy that was trying to be able to afford his Ford F-150. It balances out, unless you deal with that mechanism in a different way. The other thing that's super important here is GDP, right? Skewed calculation, though it may be, still one of the better measures we've developed so far for economic activity. All of this wealth that we enjoyed is tied almost directly to that energy. So we're saying, well, we can just have the, we'll just live the way we do now, but we'll power the whole thing with renewable resources. This is the renewable resource piece. I think that's going to work out. So this is a real existential problem for us right now. And this, much of what you hear about, well, we'll just, run the thing on photovoltaics and all that kind of stuff. Nice idea, there's nothing wrong with it. I do the same thing on my farm, whatever. But that's not what's going to prevent climate disaster. Okay. Here's roughly where we are in terms of the history of oil in the world. this little pulse. We're about the blue star, the red star, who knows what comes after that. Here's how it relates, one of the ways it relates to poverty. So I just had to recalculate this yesterday because the price of oil has been shooting up due to supply issues and extraction issues. We've extracted all the easy to get stuff in fracking, and now it's getting much more expensive. Companies are going bust right and left. But even at current oil prices, right? A barrel of oil contains the energy equivalent of 25,000 hours of human labor. Again, that's not an exaggeration. That's based on exactly what you can do with your body. Think of pushing your car 30 miles and how much energy that takes up, right? And we do that for a gallon, right? So what this really means, and where it comes down here, is that when you automate a job, essentially what you're doing is replacing the human with fossil fuel. It's not a mental activity, and it really does. That's not actually how it happens. And what that's the equivalent of is paying somebody 3.3 cents an hour. Okay? How tempting is that to a for-profit business? And even if you want to be as charitable as you can be, how is that business going to compete with another business that's paying the equivalent of 3.3 cents? Pressure to do this is enormous. Pre-COVID, there were 28 million US businesses that combined were planning to automate 75 million jobs by 2030 using more fossil fuel. 2 headlines from the BBC last week. One is that in 2021, the 20 largest emission producers in the world increased their emissions. Okay? Now we're supposed to be on this serious track to get benefit. The other headline was out the day before yesterday was boom ahead for fossil fuel extraction. All the signs are up. We're going to start pulling this stuff out. If you want to dig into this stuff, this is the best source I found. The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells came out about 2 years ago. That's where I got the statistic, by the way, on Bitcoin. 4 almost closing thoughts. So I've been working in the low-income poverty world for 50 years. So I worked first with the Wilder Foundation. I'm convinced that poverty shapes behavior more than behavior shapes poverty. That's the first thing. Second, because poor people are not the cause of poverty, fixing their perceived deficiencies won't reduce poverty. And this is an issue that I have in my field, where we in the community action world, and I fight this fight on the national level all the time, we're about addressing the causes of poverty, But in reality, about 95% of the money in my agency and any other CAP goes to fix the deficiencies, supposed deficiencies of poor people or the conditions that they live in. Their housing or their education or all that kind of stuff. That's not the cause of poverty. Okay. Third thing, we're not ready for the projected loss of 75 million jobs in the next decade from artificial intelligence, robotics, and automation. And fourth, we're not ready for climate change. However, we're going to end on a slightly happy note anyway. The good news is, well, we are going to have to live dramatically differently if we're going to live at all. Most of the things that constitute a good quality of life don't require all the stuff that we use all the control for. It's human relationships, it's community, it's connection with the land that you're dwelling on and the people that you're around. That's the point. So people go, if we have to cut back all this stuff, it's life and hell, everything goes. No, it isn't. It's not even life and heck. It's, it's possible. As we've proven in 200,000 years on the planet to have a very meaningful quality of life without destroying the place. And on that happy note, wraps up my presentation. Just about out of the frame, and I would be more than happy to entertain questions or comments. Not from you, yes.
So you said that about 29% of people are in that analyst kind of range, and that they pay about 22% of their income on taxes. Why do they have such high taxes, especially when some people make a lot more? I mean, that's probably a really arbitrary question.
Well, it's a really arbitrary answer, but it is. They're not able to buy politicians. They don't have enough money to look after their interests where the laws are being made. Okay? And they make some money, so they're taxable. Poor people that don't have any money are, so that's why they have the middle class is much more heavy tax. Sorry to say. Yes, sir.
One follow-up to that and then another question.
Yeah.
Is that just income taxes or is that,
That's all taxes.
that's all taxes?
So some of those
Sales
are
tax,
paid to everybody, but again, so much of the super wealth goes to things like stocks and everything. You don't pay taxes. You don't pay taxes if you buy stocks. You don't. That world is a very different world. Whereas almost all the money that's in a Alice household goes down to the store and spends right away because they have to. It takes all that money to do it. Most of that's got a sales tax on it, or they pay driver's license, car license tax. Right?
And then my other question, could you go back a couple of slides? One more, yeah. This idea that automating all of these jobs, am I interpreting that right? Theoretically, after all those jobs are automated, the automation will take more climate-changing fossil fuel than the processes that are implemented today? Is that what you're saying? Is that because of electricity to run the automation or whatever?
Yeah. So let's take a fairly straightforward example of working on an assembly line, right? And your job is to pick up this thing and hook it onto this thing. You're using about 1,700. I'm sorry. That figure's not in my head right now. It's about 6/10. I'm sorry, I got it back.
Mm-hmm.
Use 6/10 of a kilowatt of energy to do that. That's as much money, as much energy as a human body working about 8 hours a day can spend, right? If you're having a machine do that, right, that's going to be using many times as many kilowatt hours. That's what I'm getting at.
So it's not necessarily more fossil fuel will be used, but it's the equivalent of human energy that's being spent.
Right.
Yeah.
And going back to the chart of where does our energy come from? Well, how much of that is fossil fuel? It's this chunk. Like, this is through 2018, and these figures, by the way, come from British Petroleum. That's who keeps these.
I noticed
Yeah.
that it was a petroleum company, and they tout themselves as being on the vanguard of going to alternative sources. And I see that you are using some great information. I'm just wondering, sometimes it doesn't make sense.
That might be actually the title of my next version of this presentation. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. Because I think that kind of works. As it turns out, these things are a little bifurcated, but for many years, British Petroleum Company has kept statistics that are kind of the gold standard in the energy industry, and they're very accurate and they're very careful. It doesn't conform to what's necessarily in the advertising campaign or anything else in terms of the impact of stuff. And again, I don't necessarily demonize the oil industry. Here's why. What they are doing is providing a product that we buy in mass. And the image that I have in my head is, we are scolding the oil companies constantly. You see this all the time. With one hand, with the other hand, we're feeding them all the money they could possibly want to profit from their work. Something's got to change here. I think this is the problem, not this. Okay. Yes, sir.
It seems like that people are, well, this is an assumption, but it seems like people are pretty disconnected with a lot of the figures and data that you presented, which might make it hard for them to take action and stuff like that. Same thing with climate change. What, I guess, like, what are some maybe 3 things that you recommend people hear out listening to this to help with this, either poverty alleviation or things that you said were part of the problem or stuff?
I'll try to answer your question this way. Most of what you've heard here, I put together, okay, over many years. And this information that I am sharing with you tonight does not have a constituency, okay? There's not a vested interest out there other than the general interest of people who, care about other people on the planet. But in terms of a constituency promoting this stuff, I'm not getting any money. None of this is working in that sense. So I don't know where that's headed. If you want good information, there is tons of it out there. Okay. Organization called the Post-Carbon Institute. I know these guys very well. Been doing fantastic work over the years. There's a new book. I hesitate to recommend it because I haven't finished it yet, but at the same time, I know the guy who wrote it, and it's fantastic stuff that I've seen so far. A guy named Richard Heinberg, written many books on this topic. The one we just finished is one called Power, that puts all of these things together in a way that's better than anything I've seen. I think, and I'm not happy about this, of course, is that we are not likely to move in any dramatic way until we're forced to. Okay. I'm a huge fan. The love of my life is Greta Thunberg. As she gets up and just tells it like it is. And with, again, just fantastic voice art. But she really is exactly right on this. And at the end of the day, reality bats last. We can only deny the reality of climate change, like so many have for so many years, for so long before we're underwater or we're on fire, and it's you got to accept it. We are approaching that point because of the accelerating impact of climate change, for example. And to me, it's an open question as to whether or not the collective human experience will get their act together enough to respond when denial is no longer an option in a way that works quickly enough. I don't know. The other thing that happens is, we're also primates, right? And the more people that are out doing the stuff that I'm doing and the stuff that a lot of you are probably doing and your neighbors are doing, the more people will see people doing that and go, well, I can do that, or that seems to make sense and everything. How fast that all moves, the human species as a global species has never faced this. We've never been in this circumstance. Never been that globally connected, never had the impact on everything that we have right now. So there's no precedent. I wish I could be more helpful. That's all I got. That's mine.
I have a lot of thoughts running through my head, and I'm trying to narrow it down to just 1 or 2 questions for you. I'm connected with some folks who are in conversation about like more intentional community in this area, tiny houses, stuff like that. And the reality is there's a lot of local ordinances, laws, whatever, that tell you you have to do this and you have to do that. And you really, like, people think that you can just live on the land as long as you bought it and you can do what you want. And that's not true. So, like, even people who are really trying to do their own part, minimize their actions, we have a lot of ways that we're breaking the law to try to do that. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, the easy answer is to get engaged with
For city council.
the process. Yeah, run for city council,
I think
get behind, I mean, I live with my oldest daughter. She's 26 years old. She just joined the planning commission for our township. And that's why, and been already successful in helping bring a lot more sanity to a quarry operation that's in our little township in rural Wisconsin. So, there's no easy answer. I mean, you can break the law, do it secretly, there's all kinds of stuff. But in my experience, and if my approach to these things, again, for what it's worth, is you can bang your head against this system forever, and more likely get crushed by it. It's bigger. What I try to do is sort of an end run. I put my energy into trying to create a society that is sustainable. Right? It doesn't matter to me in some sense, sounds a little crazy, whether it's going to work or not, because I have no idea, whether I'm totally when. But as I said, on our farm, the major product that we're trying to get on that farm is carbon in the soil that's coming out of the air. And then we put the business model together that supports that, right? And we market all the stuff that we grow, the beef locally, it doesn't travel everywhere, the animals are treated humanely. I mean, it all works. But part of that, again, and I don't want to come off as a greener than thou or anything, that's just our decision that we made in terms of getting at that. We also have a really rich lifestyle. We're involved, I'm a Morris dancer, for heaven's sakes. My daughter's a Renaissance musician, plays all over the place, and it's not life and hell. We're going after those values in that last slide of community and relationship and connection to the land. So we just live that way. If you're running into specific ordinances, it's not that hard to get into government at the lowest level. Township boards, you can get a few friends together, you can get yourself on them, and it's a good start. I'm magical of that. Am I done?
If everyone's done with questions, I
He's
just
lost,
want
and I
to
just think you're
be
right.
respectful.
One
Yeah.
more very easy question.
Sure.
Can you make this presentation available?
Yes, I say that with a slight kind of, because as you can see, I interact with this thing as like a
Yeah.
third speaker, so it's not exactly like a set of informational things. But I'd be more than happy to share it. I don't know if you can do that. I don't mind it being done. You can send this out to anybody. There's nothing in here that I'm not willing to stand behind either.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody. It's been a real pleasure. Okay.
Jar of maple syrup.
And from Mike Marine. The day is not a total loss.
No, it's not. So thank you again, Peter, for presenting tonight. Wonderful presentation. We appreciate all the knowledge that you've shared. So before we depart, I just want to let you know that we will be having another event in this series, which will be on Monday, November 15th at 6 p.m. The focus will be on water, energy, and industry, and will feature Mike Thompson, who is the founder of Kairos Indoor Agriculture, as well as representatives from the Roberts, Wisconsin wastewater treatment plant, which you can see glowing purple on Highway 94. So you will once again be able to attend here in person or tune in live via the library's Facebook page or the YouTube channel. So thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.